So that video was created by some creatives from the iHub, where Geraldine came to see me about 6 months ago about speaking at Republica. And at the time, she basically told me, you can't speak about anything you've done because we've already had speakers who've said stuff like that before. So I had to come up with a new talk. But I did want to address a couple things. First off, that last year you had Mark Kaigwa here, a friend of mine, and he talked to you about the idea of Africa and really how it's much more nuanced than the old stories and the old narratives that you've heard are. And there's another lady by the name of Chimamanda Adichie from Nigeria who talks about the danger of telling a single story and how it's really difficult if it's about people and even a country. But imagine at a continent how much more nuanced it is than it is for just a personal level. And then my one thought on just what we think about Africa is that, you know, the Africa we live in today is not the Africa of the 80s and 90s, but that's still the narrative that's talked about in many parts of the world. About 2 years ago, I think 2011, my then colleague Patrick Meyer came and spoke about Ushahidi, which is one of the companies that I co-founded. And you know, it's quite interesting and humbling to see how it's grown from nothing really 5 years ago to now 48,000 plus maps and 159 countries around the world, used for things that we never would have thought of. And you know, this started from Kenya, from 3 other Kenyans and myself. So what we're seeing, I think, is this idea of reverse distribution, and the reverse distribution of ideas, products, models. We've seen it with Sproxel and what they do with counterfeit drugs. We've seen it with Ushahidi and crowdsourced mapping. We've seen it with M-Pesa and mobile money. We've seen it with Mixit and social networking. These are ideas or products, specifically in the tech side, that are then shifting over and being used globally. There's an interesting story that came up because, well, just this last week, actually. So AfriGadget's one of the blogs that I started. It's a team blog, and actually there's a guy here by the name of @JKE, Jürgen, who's a longtime team blogger on this as well. And AfriGadget is a site where we just kind of tell the stories of African ingenuity. At dinner the other night, I was talking to an individual who's part of a startup here called Knowable. And he was talking about how he had seen this story of bird feeders made from just old plastic jugs, and there's a drip irrigation system there made from another jug. It's just kind of simple innovation using very practical tools and whatever you can find around you. And he had this idea about what if we had a site where you could just plug in what you had, and then it could tell you what you could make from that. Right? And so Knowable is that kind of thing. But it's even more interesting because the idea for Knowable also came because he had seen that story in AfriGadget, and then he had walked around and somewhere in Berlin, he had seen somebody with that same bird feeder set up, and he asked them where they got it from. He said, well, I read the site called AfriGadget. So this idea that, stories are very powerful is something that's very dear to me, because I know this conference was started by bloggers, and I'm a blogger myself. I have been for, I think it's 8 years now. And I think it's something that we can't forget. We always have to tell interesting stories because you never know what will happen if you do. Like, you don't know. That was a ripple effect that, from a story from 2008 or 2009 that was striking today. So this was a picture that Mark showed last year. This is on Lamu Island. Lamu is off the coast of Kenya, and the cell phone has really made the terrestrial phone system obsolete, right? So this idea that you just skip a whole generation. And I think this is what's important to understand about innovation, because I just want to speak briefly about my thoughts on innovation, because it'll frame some of what else I talk to you about. In that I think that innovation kills the status quo. And I use those strong words on purpose, because I think that so many people don't really think through what it means, what innovation really means. Because it all started because I was asked by people, like, how do you find innovators? And I was like, well, I didn't really notice I was looking for innovators, but I guess because of what I do, I think some of the things that we see are very innovative. But you have to dig deeper into what innovation is. And what are the power structures that make things be identified as innovative? Because really innovation is just about doing something a little different. It's not about inventiveness necessarily. It's about changing and moving on something different. So I think that in any industry, society or business, there are status quo powers at play. These are generally legacy structures set up for a time and place that needed the design then. So, an example of this is big media, especially in the print and broadcasting side, and how it's been disrupted by the internet and mobiles and social networking in the last 10 years alone. How about government? How about the humanitarian space? How about energy and power? All these industries were seen as innovative when they came into their own decades ago. Now they're a legacy in both infrastructure and design, and their relevancy in their current state is in question. By their nature, they fight to maintain the power structures that keep them in the position that they hold, and changes to the foundations on which they stand is not only scary, but it's deadly. So innovation comes from the edges, and it should come as no surprise that innovators are found at the margins. They are the misfits among us, the ones who see and do things differently. They challenge the status quo and the power sources that prop them up, so are generally marginalized as reflexive and defensive action by those same powers. Think about what you're asking for when you say you want innovation. Because when you do, you're asking for the outliers, the disruptors, and the rebels to have their way. You're asking for a new way of thinking and doing, and you're in a position of power within an industry you're likely going to be upset about along the way. So that's the only thing I'm going to read, because I usually don't like reading up in front. But it's very important to understand that when you ask for innovation, you might not be getting what you think you're getting, right? Especially if you're in a position of power, okay? So when Daimler, Microsoft, GIZ, when they ask for innovation, do they understand what it means? It means that they're going to be disrupted. Okay, this is my dad. I grew up in South Sudan, as you could probably tell when you first saw me. I moved to Kenya when I was about 6 years old because the war disrupted us there. But what you see here is my dad sitting in a Taposa village. My dad was a linguist, and he was doing translation work. And you see that structure behind him. That's not a house, that's a storage unit. The houses are like the one to the right, which is actually bigger, but I couldn't find a picture of it. Now these structures are really hard to build. You basically have to take bushels of grass about this big around and cut them, and then you have to break them into smaller bushels, and you have to layer them. You see the base is smaller than the top, so you layer them upside down and they go up like this. Now, a house is about 5 meters tall and about 4 meters wide, 4 meters in diameter, okay? So it takes a lot of grass to do this. And the truth is that you can't find the grass within 50 kilometers. You have to walk 50 kilometers. So how are you going to do this with 2 people, 3 people, whose house this is going to be, right? You don't. The truth is, it takes a village. The village comes together to build a house. This is the lesson that I've learned. This is the lesson that we've learned at the iHub, that we ask each other, we ask the new members, are you a villager? Are you willing to help out? Or are you an individual? Because if you're an individual, that's fine too, but then don't expect a lot of help from everybody else either, right? And so, we started the iHub 3 years ago, and we're now up to 10,000 plus members. And, these members do all kinds of different things. It's the cross-section of technology in Kenya, whether you're a startup guy or you're a freelancer, whether you're an academia-type person, whether you're a student or a professor, government, corporates. This cross-section is who we are. And they'll come and do different things at the iHub. For instance, we've had 120 plus events. Those could be everything from your PHP user group to this is the CEO of Safaricom coming in to address the community and have some questions asked. I really wish I should have added a couple slides here to tell the story about how he claimed he was going to reduce some of the friction on internet data capping on your mobile phone, and then he reneged on that, and so we blogged about it later, and there's been little bit of a falling out since then. So blogging is still very rampant and disruptive as well. We also have a lot of startups coming out of there. In total, I think we've seen just around 50 in the last 3 years. And really, this is about, and I'll talk about this later, it's about serendipity. You don't understand how powerful it is to just put a bunch of smart people in a room and hope good things happen until you see it working, and you really have a hard time measuring it. But some of these guys just met up at the coffee bar. We have a coffee bar in there, and other people sat in there and built their startup from scratch, just 2 people around a desk, and now they have $1 million of funding and are moving strong. We also built out this incubator. A lot of what we do at the iHub is looking at the environment that we're in and just trying to fill in the gaps. So building the ecosystem as we see it. At the time in 2010, there wasn't any other incubators, especially for mobile tech. So that's what the ImLab's about. We have some InfoDev backing on this, and we've had a number of startups move through it. Some of them have already moved on, and some of them are doing well, and some of them are washing out, just like you'd expect from any type of incubator anywhere in the world. Recently, we started a UX lab. Why a UX lab? Well, because nowhere north of South Africa is there anybody focusing on user experience and design. So we said, well, let's go ahead and do that. We can surely do this. And one of our corporate partners, Google, was very interested in having this done locally as well. And so they helped us make this happen. The other one is a supercomputer cluster. We had an individual from our community say, hey, big data, cloud computing, this is the future, but nobody here knows really how to do it, knows how to build for it or anything. Can we build a place where we can come in and hack on this stuff together? And the answer was, yeah, sure, why not? Let's see if we can find some sponsors and build this thing. So it started off with me hauling back a trunk load of, I think I had like $20,000 worth of computer equipment in a trunk coming from the US, and thank goodness I got through customs without too much hassle. We also do events like this. This is Pivot. Pivot happens each year. It'll be in Kampala this year. But it's an event where we have 25 startup companies get to pitch from the stage to investors and media, get asked a lot of questions. It's been interesting to see some of these guys get funding even before the event's over. Like I said, it'll be in Kampala this year, so if you're heading to, if you have an empty weekend around June 25th and 26th, come on down, and you can see kind of what's next coming from the mobile space in East Africa. We also support other events. So Demo Africa is an event that started last year in Nairobi. It'll be in Nairobi again this year. Again, more startups, but now from all across Africa, not just East Africa. And they run a fantastic event with a lot of people as well. You know, the other thing we saw that was missing, if you come and talk to me 3 years ago, my big thing was, hey, we don't have any seed capital for people to actually start their company with. It becomes really hard because there's no history of angel investing in East Africa, or very little, because quite frankly, there's lower hanging fruit. The real estate market is booming. You know, if you have money, you might as well build a building most of the time. So how are you going to get people to put money, 25,000 euros, into a small startup? Well, it's really difficult. So we started this fund, Savannah Fund, just to pull some of that capital together. We've had 5 investments now over the last 6 months, and we'll see where it goes. And then we've also seen a growth in the women in tech space. There's a group called the Akira Chicks who started up out of the iHub as well. And they bring together girls for training for HTML or web design or sometimes PHP. And you know, what we're starting to see is the community itself is growing itself. And then finally, iHub Research, which is one of our very early initiatives, is also one of our most interesting, because what they do is not only research for corporates and big organizations, but they also do research on the tech hubs across Africa, which I'll get to next, and the iHub itself. So we have a better understanding of who we are and what actually works. This has been great for our sustainability as well, because it allows us to bring in revenue to offset the costs of running the space. You heard earlier, I think, I couldn't really understand the German, but I think you heard earlier from some of the founders about the fact that there was a bunch of African tech hub leaders here. So AfroLabs was founded 3 years ago as well, and now it's risen to be 19 labs in 13 different countries across Africa. These are the tech hubs that, they're very different in model, and I'll get to that in a minute. They can be focused on consulting work at first. Maybe they're focused on community like ours. Maybe they're focused on incubation. And maybe they're focused on accelerating small startups. But they differ. So the first year, in 2010, there was just 5 of us. 2 in Nairobi, 1 in Cameroon, 1 in Uganda, 1 in Senegal. This year, we added a bunch more. And we're probably going to have another group come in before the end of the year. By the way, being a mapping guy, you're going to get a lot of maps in this next section, so I'm going to completely abuse your ability to look at maps of Africa. So now this is what we're looking at. This is the claimed tech hubs across the continent. And you can see that there's this broad spread. It really started last year. Beginning of last year, we saw this explosion of new tech hubs. And I'll make this available online if it's not already, so you can find a better version of it. But the idea was that, when we started the iHub, when Hive Collab or Active Spaces were going on back in 2009, 2010, that we were just kind of, experimenting. We had no idea what we were really doing, right? But what we ended up doing was setting in motion a little bit of a model that others in other countries could also do. And the idea here is that you look for local champions, people who are already going to do it on their own, and you try and back them. So in Cameroon, this is Active Spaces. Cameroon is one of the good ones. These guys started off with a lot of guys who are doing consulting work on kind of together as a collaboration to get things going, and they've grown and grown since then. Another one is maybe the most creative looking of them, is made out of old shipping containers in Ethiopia. This one is based on the university campus, and so has an academic root to it that a lot of the other tech hubs don't have. Interestingly enough, it's also a really hard place to work. What happens when the internet goes out for 6 weeks? How do you keep working on internet stuff? Well, it's hard for us to answer that in Germany, right, because we don't have that problem, but they did recently, right? And it also is a reminder for guys like us in Nairobi that when we complain about internet, at least it doesn't go out for 6 weeks at a time. Ours will go out for a day, maybe. And I still think this is the coolest looking one. Whoever designed it deserves an award. Nigeria has the CC Hub. The CC Hub, a co-creation hub in Nigeria, is community-based. They're really focused on social entrepreneurs. They have great corporate partnerships, and they're doing some really interesting stuff with the city to make the whole neighborhood that they're in become this tech campus for Lagos. So you can imagine a mega city like Lagos with a tech hub, but not just a tech hub with one little building, but a whole neighborhood devoted to this, and how powerful that will be. In Liberia, there's iLab Liberia. Liberia, I was there a couple years back, and I can tell you, at that point there was no power grid. Everybody had to work off generators. The amount of money it takes to get a satellite connection for internet, because that's all you can get, is exorbitantly expensive. So to even set up this place and have it running was at a whole nother level of expense than you could expect anywhere else in the world. But they started something going. And now, 3 years later, they're starting to see the fruits of that, because what they do is they find guys and they train them up, and these are the guys who, they might be working with governments, they might be working with the NGO sector, they might be trying their own thing. But these guys are starting so much more raw than everybody else and then moving their way up. And so it's just a really great story, and it's this light, kind of bright spot in Monrovia. Finally, the last model is the one in Ghana. This is MEST, Meltwater Institute, and I don't know a better way to describe it than saying MEST is probably like finishing school for entrepreneurs. So you go through a 2-year track of just training on entrepreneurship. And at the end of that, you're supposed to have prototyped out an idea, and then you'll get funding for it. But you also have a graduation. I can't imagine a graduation at the iHub. We just don't have that model at all. But it works here. And they're doing some amazing things. And they've got startups now coming out of there that are focused on global products, not just local products, and taking those to market. So I mentioned earlier that we have one of the advantages of having iHub research arm is that we get to do research. And so over the last 2 years, by funding from Indigo Trust and some others, one of our researchers has been going around to a bunch of different hubs. She's done 7 different tech hubs so far in, I think, 6 countries, and 7 countries, and has come up with some basic things. Of course, one of them is community is the center, and then what else helps you make this thing work? For us in Nairobi, it was really about understanding that the community had to be involved from the very beginning, right? You can't come in and make something and say, okay, we're done, now come help, now come be a part of this, right? You have to involve it early on. So for us at the iHub, it was realizing that we had to have the community help design the space. So the space itself was designed by creatives in Nairobi. The logo, actually, we did a 99 designs competition. I saw them out there, which was fun. But we had a lot of the Kenyan creatives again, putting up their ideas on 99 designs, and that's how we got the logo. Then we had the network needed to be set up. And again, the community came in and they built the network out, and they still maintain it today, community-run network. And sometimes it goes down, and they're in there on the weekends, slaving away on it, and you can tell that they have a stake in it, right? This is their space. And I think that's what's really important. And this is the same thing that applies to all the other successful tech hubs that we've seen across the continent, have this very strong ownership by the community in that space. So what are the lessons that we learn about from these tech hubs? One is that community is actually a competitive advantage. Community is something that is hard to grow. It's really, really difficult. It's something that you have to focus on every single day. But it's a competitive advantage. If you can grow it, then you'll have much more success. The second one is something I mentioned earlier, is how do you measure serendipity? It's hard to understand the power of just people meeting up, about smart people meeting in a room and good things happening. But it really does matter. And I tell us, back in 2010, we were going around talking to corporate partners. And so Google was one of them. I was in the Google office in Nairobi, and Joe Musheru and 3 or 4 of the other Google guys were there, and they said, well, how are you going to measure success? So I said, well, I think we'll put a bunch of smart people in a room and hope good things happen. And there was this moment of like everybody looking at each other and kind of smiling, and then like, sure, why not? We're in. Because it's really hard for especially American companies to understand this idea that sometimes you can't measure every piece that becomes successful, right? And it's really, it was really just big of them, I think, at that time to take a risk on it. And we said, you know what, we'll figure it out later. We'll figure out if there's things that we can measure. I hear a lot of people saying, like, fail fast, fail often, and everything. And I'm like, that's true, right? You want to have a really experimental side to whatever you do, but don't seek failure, right? You seek success, but think of it as more about you're thinking about experimentation. You're actually just trying to experiment as much as you can. And if you come back with that kind of mindset, you get a whole lot more done, because then you can take a look at both your successes and failures and be able to learn from them. We did this very early on ourselves. It was the idea of like, hey, we don't know what we're doing. Let's be honest with that. Let's say we're experimenting with it. And the things that work, we'll double down on. And the things that aren't working, we'll learn from and talk about openly. So one of the things that we kind of stubbed our toe on the second year was we're like, well, we need a mentorship program. Mentorship programs are not easy, number one. Mentorship programs can be really done poorly, as we found out. And we realized that it just wasn't something that we were good at. We had to figure out another model. So instead of having these sessions that mentors didn't want to come to and the mentees weren't getting as much out of, we decided, you know what, let's just partner with more of the investor group, the investor community, and see if they then will be the mentors, because they're going to be investing in the people already anyway. So there's a couple other things. You know, I'm not a big believer in aid. I think that it can be something that undermines the real desire for something to grow internally and real ownership locally. But I think there is a space for it when you're talking about infrastructural stuff, foundational things, right? So if some other country wants to help with subsidization of the undersea internet cable into West Africa, great, that's a good one, right? You know, if somebody wants to provide some basic support for the initial setup of a tech hub, I think that's a great idea. But then those tech hubs should figure out how to be sustainable on their own. Otherwise they're always going to be just looking for the next handout. And that's not good for them or their community. You do this by finding local champions. Another thing I mentioned earlier, like, I know that this is not new for Germany, it's not new for Berlin. I mean, I think there's over a dozen co-working spaces, a lot of accelerator spaces here in Berlin, but it's something that, you know, we're learning about across the continent, understanding that you find the people with the fire in their belly to do it already. The best example I have of this is a gentleman here who's the tech hub founder for Bongo Hive out of Zambia. Back in 2010, they got this idea, they wanted to do it as well, and he and his friends, you know, they visited the iHub to kind of get an understanding of it. They went back down, they figured out the model that would work for them at the local level, and they made it happen. And it's now one of the most vibrant of the tech hubs, even though it's not a huge one. And then there's this question that keeps popping up about why Berlin? Why are we here? Why are these Afrolabs? And you're going to have a chance to meet them in the Global Innovation Lounge that's out in the main hall. Why are we meeting in Berlin? We kind of tongue-in-cheek call it the Berlin Accord, because it's this time when it's the first time that the tech hubs have ever met from Africa. And the idea is that we have a chance to talk. We have a chance to figure out if there's something that's shared between us. And the only way that was possible is because GIZ sponsored us all to fly in and meet. And I think that, too, is something that's interesting. This idea that you can have people going between different countries, and that there's real value in the mixing of the blood, right? Where you get people from different parts of Africa here meeting up with their counterparts from other parts of the world, including Germany, and hopefully vice versa. We'll see some of those tech hub leaders from or co-creation spaces here going to Africa as well. One of the maps that came out of it was this from yesterday, and this map was just of who was represented. And there was somebody else who tweeted right after this image was put up online that it was almost inverse to this, which is a heat map of the global innovation spaces around the world. And so the truth is that this just isn't being measured very well, right, yet, and that's actually the story. I see the African tech hub leaders are the ones clapping. So you know, what's interesting is that not that we don't have innovation happening in Africa, like it seems, or in Asia, right? But that it's not being really studied yet, or the standards for it are being applied in a different way. Like, one of the big problems we have about innovation and how it's measured is that people say, well, how many patents are put up each year? Well, you know how hard it is to do a patent in some of these countries? It's very difficult, right? So, and then it's even harder to maybe even get the numbers from the government to support what was said. So, you know, we have to come up with a different way to measure innovation globally is actually what is the answer to that. And then finally, should there be a global network of these tech hubs, or at least a gathering of sorts that happens from time to time so that we learn from each other. We're doing this in Africa through AfriLabs. Is there room or is there space for something to happen every couple of years at a global level? I think there might be, but I'm also not the person to decide that. That's what has to come out of the networks on their own. Okay, I'm going to shift gears here a little bit and talk about making things. This is actually more of the geeky fun stuff that I love. So this is a soccer ball this is in Tanzania. And just made from plastic bags and twine and put together. About 2 years ago, I was up in the northern part of Kenya, and I was up there with one of my friends who had grown up out there as well, and a couple of photographers. He was taking them up there to take pictures of. They were from this aid group about water and into these really, really dry areas that never saw rain. Well, except for this, like 2 weeks that we were up there. It had more rain in those 2 weeks than had been seen in 20 years. There was new rivers that formed that are actually still there today. There's lakes now that didn't exist before. And, driving along on that very first night, we were off on this track, and we just slithered through about 1 kilometer of this really crazy mud and come out to this dry spot, and there was this little gully in front of us. And, you think that being kind of old Africa guys who had kind of grown up in some bush country, we would be smart enough to jump out and go ahead and check the depth before we drove through it, but we didn't. And this is the result. We bogged down. And it was terrible because actually the width of the vehicle, or the length of the vehicle, was actually the exact width of the gully. So you imagine you have these big fenders on the front and back, right? And you drive in, you go thunk, 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 and you can't move forward or backwards, right? You're just stuck. And so this was 8 p.m. at night, and so we pile out. This is moving water, so we know we have to move quickly, because what's happening, if you've driven four-wheel drives, is that the water is washing underneath the tires, so your tires are now off the ground. Therefore, you have no purchase at all to move. So we're out there, and we jump out, and we're like, okay, where's the shovel? Oh, I forgot the shovel. Okay, great. All right, let's get the winch out. Let's get the high lift jack out. Get the high lift jack out, and we're cranking it up. We're cranking it up, and the handle breaks. Okay. So what else do we have? Well, we have a Maasai knife. A Maasai knife is like about this long. It's got a handle on one end, and it's double bladed, so it's like a little sword. We can't dig out in front of us because it's too steep, so we start digging out behind the vehicle, and you see me digging underneath the vehicle at that point. But we're stabbing into the ground. Fortunately, it's kind of loamy, sandy soil. We're stabbing into the ground, taking turns. And about 11:30, I'm stabbing down, and I'm getting tired. My hand slips down the blade, and I've got some scars now to prove it. It just slices right into the meat of my hand, and I think that's it for the night, right? You do grab a towel, wash it out, tape it down, and just kind of hope that you can get to a hospital or a clinic or something the next day to stitch it up. But what's the lesson from this for us? Is that in many things in Africa, you have to do it on your own. You have to fix it. There's nobody else who's going to do it for you, right? And so this idea of practical innovation, about coming up with your own ways to solve problems, is really important. The next day, my friend who I grew up there with hiked about 7 kilometers to a hill, got a cell phone connection. We had some other people come and yank us out. But the idea of practical products and practical innovation comes from this base that nobody else is going to help you. And you can't just go to a store and buy another one very easily. These are tools for a guy who does small engine repair in Nairobi. You can see 3 of them are made by himself, fabricated. Are they good looking? No. But do they work? Yes. Now, I'm going to show you a couple examples of these. We're going to run through a couple of different things. This is a seed planting tool. Okay, this is the top end of it, and this is the bottom end of it. Now, this was in Ghana. This guy who lived out in a rural area built this device after he had seen a a pill dispenser mechanism and said, I can use that idea, and I can make this. Now, who knows if that's patented by somebody somewhere in the world? It doesn't matter, because he's made a couple hundred of these and sold them to other people. But it's this hardy tool that's about this tall, and you just walk along the ground and you plunk it in, and you plant your maize, or you plant whatever you're planting. Again, practical, simple innovation.
I'm ready to disco. Give me something, and I'll give you something. I'm ready to disco. Give me something, and I'll give you something.
It's about building this new, building a car, right? Something that you, like, oh, well, I wouldn't have thought of that. But he's doing it, he's got to import some of the parts from China and India and other places, but all the fabrication gets done in Kenya. The frame is built there. And now he's able to offer it at $6,000 a piece, and you can pre-order them now, which is great. I see him driving around Nairobi from time to time. And it's interesting, because what you're seeing that, hey, it doesn't just have to be simple stuff. I talked to you about AfriGadget, and some of the stuff that we've had from AfriGadget are like this, right? Like, this is a bottle opener, right? Very simple one. It's actually, you'll see this design elsewhere in the world. Just put a screw in a piece of wood. But the idea here is that they make it look all pretty and sell it to tourists and sell it to companies as things that they can give out. Another example is, this is a paraffin lamp. There's actually a whole supply chain behind how the trash gets from the street and gets into facilities where they get moved around and put into different parts and then sold to the guys who make these things. And they sell for equivalent of maybe 40 cents in euros. And you can see there's nothing very special about it. But this kind of lamp is what lights so many houses across the continent. Last year, Mark also talked to you a little bit about Juakali. Juakali is this idea, this is the term for it in East Africa, that has different terms around the continent, is this idea of the hot sun. Right? These guys who kind of bang metal out there in the hot sun. I don't have the other picture of this, but if you look down here, this bellows is run by a bicycle. With another guy turning it like this. So an old bicycle has been turned into a bellows itself. So, with the blog AfriGadget started, I think that was in 2006. And then with Maker for Africa, an event that we put on in 2009, we started to see a lot of really interesting stuff. So I'm going to run you through quickly through a couple of them so you get an understanding of kind of what's going on across the continent. You've seen a couple already. This is a professor. He uses magnesium and water and makes a heating device, and then, well, he makes a heating mixture that he puts inside like old refrigerators, and then you can actually store things with a certain amount of heat. Now, having been in Ghana, I don't know why you need more heat, but this is a good case in just using some scientific knowledge and some business acumen to make a product. This gentleman makes a sisal rope machine. It took him, this is I think this is the 4th and 5th generation of both the fiber separator and the machine itself. And he started up in rural Kenya. He's now, he's actually a TED Fellow now. He does some really cool stuff, and he basically, besides inventing it or iterating on another invention, he's built a business out of it. So this idea of making it an enterprise is very much at the heart of most of what you see coming out of Africa, because nobody has time for the fluffy stuff. You have to make money and you have to live first. Except for guys like this. So this guy was also in Nairobi, and he had the unfortunate, he's a university student, and he had the unfortunate experience of having his TV stolen from his room. And so he said, well, I'm not going to let that happen again. And so if you look really closely, you'll see this is really like a circuit board he made from scratch. And if you look down the lower left, you'll see that the shocker is 400 volts. So if he doesn't turn this thing off with his cell phone, and he gets a signal when somebody breaks into his house, if he doesn't turn it off, then the door itself is wired up to 400 volts. Okay, you'll die if he doesn't do this. And it's got 11 stages, right? So this is not some simple, like, okay, that's the only thing that'll stop. No, this is an 11-stage security system. It is fascinating. We also have other people who kind of use old materials. So this is old plastic that comes from a variety of places, but a lot of them are plastic bags remade into designer accessories. And then we've seen guys in Egypt, like these guys built a self-driving car. It's kind of cobbled together a little bit. It's not quite like the Google self-driving car. But, you know, they were able to make it run and not hit too many people. And then in Nigeria, we had these guys called recyclers. And they basically, it wasn't so much the invention itself as the business innovation around it, right? So they basically, they took bikes and modded them. And then they cycled those around the neighborhoods in Lagos. And they pick up trash. And this is sponsored and funded by corporates who then basically get some good CSR out of it as well. And it's really been effective. I mean, they've been growing. This was started last year, and they're already making quite a bit of money. And it started by a Nigerian and a Kenyan. Yes, and this old man, this machine he hand-built, okay? This machine can do about everything you can imagine to yams and to potatoes, and I mean, it can crush them, it can shred them, it can do about everything you would ask, and it also pulps them. He went to the U.S. for university, 50 years ago, came back to Ghana, and he's 70-something years old, and he has this machine he's trying to market around because there's so much waste in the agricultural sector. He's saying if people were to use these kind of machines, if just neighborhoods or communities were to invest in this kind of a thing, there'd be so much of that waste would be saved. And finally, I ride a motorcycle too, so this is one of my favorite guys. He doesn't even go by a name; he goes by his initials, all right? STM, and he built this trike from scratch. Everything from scratch. I mean, obviously not the motor, but he built this thing from scratch, and he drives it around Lagos, and he has, plans to maybe build some, mod them, sell them to other people. But it's this idea that, you can actually make things with very little at your disposal. And that this idea that people will buy them is a major part of that innovation for these guys. And finally, this is a toy. These are toys, hydraulic toys, made by a 14-year-old kid. And again, this is at Lagos again for the last Maker for Africa we had. And these completely work. It's just, these are the kind of kits that you might buy here, right, with syringes and little tubes. But imagine if you were making that all from scratch, right? You had to, and if you notice that it has a battery pack on the left because it drives as well. It doesn't just kind of do the hydraulics, but he's also wired up a motor inside it. So he made his own toys. And you hope that guys like this will go on to bigger things in the future. So what can we learn from this? First, there's a hell of a lot going on out there. I mean, this is just scratching the surface. We're just doing Maker for Africa in a different country every year. We've done it in Ghana, Kenya, Egypt, and Nigeria. Imagine what's going on where we're not seeing it. 2, local problems need local solutions. All right, so the guys who are building these things know what the problems are, so it can be a little bit arrogant for people to come in and think that they have the solutions for them. 3, support and growth are lacking, specifically in that foundational support of the tools and the things that they need to make it work. For example, and I'll tell you a little story about what we basically decided we needed to make something too. So as Ushahidi, we have a product that we're just launching actually today. But we went around and we went to the University of Nairobi Fab Lab and had some challenges there. But there's actually only 9 fab labs in all of Africa. I think 6 of them are in South Africa. There's 2 in Kenya and 1 in Ghana. ICE Addis and ICE Cairo are doing stuff with 3D printers and some fabrication now. But this is a real gap, right? There's not a lot of fabrication type spaces and tools available for people who need to actually make physical objects. Which is, by the way, one of the reasons why I think software has accelerated so much is because it takes so much less to do to get into it. You just need a computer, you need access to the internet. So we decided to build our own product at Ushahidi. We said, what we have a problem with is internet connectivity, because if you're a web shop, if your internet goes down for 3 minutes, your router has to reset, right? Or if your electricity goes off, your router resets. And sometimes your internet service provider can be a little bit slow, so what could you do to give yourself a different option? So we said, well, let's make this device, and let's make sure it has a router for 20 people. Let's make sure it has 8 hours of battery backup, so if the power goes off, you can still work for a whole day. Let's make sure it fails over to 3G, so it has a SIM card in it, so that way if your normal Ethernet connection goes out, well, you can choose another option. But more than that, too, you can unplug the power and the Ethernet, and guess what? You have a walking Wi-Fi hotspot wherever you go, so it travels as well. And also it has all the APN data for every other country in the world, so if you go to a different country, you can just throw another SIM card in there, and you'll be connected as well. And then, finally, that it has a cloud-based backend, so that it has really both a software and a hardware API. You can plug any sensor you want into the GPIO ports on the bottom, and you can use the cloud side to write software for it, and then use it and operate it from anywhere in the world. So this device is called the Brick. We think of it as the easiest, most reliable way to connect to the internet anywhere in the world, even when you don't have power or electricity. Is it going to be a big product in Germany? It's not our concern. We don't really care, all right? Is it going to be a big product in Kenya? Yes. This is going to be something that we use quite a bit. So let me walk you through this. This is the guts of, I think this was V3 of the prototype, right? It's ugly. Making stuff is hard, and it's harder when you're in Africa, right? So this is the guts of it. Nothing special. Those of you who understand the circuits and stuff, you'll see some Arduino stuff, USBs, just your normal hodgepodge of electronics, trying to make it work. We had our diagrams and made it, it looked all fancy and everything, and obviously the insides never looked that clean. This is version 1 prototype. You can see we just kind of hammered on a Huawei and a TP-Link and put them together and had a power backup on it. Very simple. Hey, it works. Let's keep trying it. So this is version 2, and Sugru came to our aid. Version 3, we decided, hey, let's put it inside a nicer case, right? Wouldn't it be cool if it was waterproof? Well, you have to drill holes in it, so it's no longer waterproof, so that didn't really work. Going to this 4th version, prototype version 4, the brick itself is now, we have it printed on it. 3D printer prints off our mold for us, basically, and it's cool. Feel like we actually have something. Finally, we get to this version. So this is January in Nairobi, and we've got this nice 3D rendering of what is going to be the brick. We're like, this is great. And we even put like an Ushahidi logo power button. It was awesome, right? Except for the fact that we had to go down to the University of Nairobi Fab Lab to mill it. And the problem is that some of these spaces, they're fantastic. They give a chance for people to try new things, but they aren't always well maintained. And so we had to spend 2 days with our engineers down there just trying to get this machine into close enough allowances that we could actually do the milling. And so it was really a painful process and experience for us. This was it finally milled out, and you can see it's not always as beautiful as you think it's going to look in the 3D rendering. And when we learned some lessons, though, right? And these lessons are things that, because of our position and because of what we do and our connections with, like the iHub and AfroLabs, is something that we want to do something about. First of all is that current facilities do not meet basic requirements for prototyping and small-scale manufacturing or fabrication, right? You can't do it very easily there, especially if you're doing something with electronics. Second, cost of materials are high. So if you're here in Berlin and you need you know, an Arduino kit or some other small component, you can have it overnighted to you at pretty low cost. We can't do that even in Nairobi, which is one of the big cities in Africa. It's expensive and it takes time. Last, local electronics resources like Arduino are hard to find at all. Like you can't, like there's nowhere you can source at all locally. So today we're launching the brick. It's on Kickstarter. It went live, I think, midnight last night. Here's prototype version 6, and it's going to get smaller. It's already smaller. It's about this big now. And the idea is that you can plug an antenna into it and extend the range, that it has power USB in, has LAN and WAN, and a SIM card slot, and it also has auxiliary USB so that you can power other things off of it if you need to. And then at the bottom, it has GPIO pins. So you can plug any sensor in the world into it and run it remotely via the cloud. Thanks. So we have a saying in Ushahidi that if it works in Africa, it'll work anywhere. And a lot of the things that we're building off of are very simple old technologies, just like this. There's nothing new about a router. There's nothing new about a modem, right? But the fact is, nobody's cobbled it together in the form that we need in Africa. Why are we still using the connectivity devices made for Berlin and New York when we live in Nairobi and New Delhi? So one of the things that we're committed to doing this year is we're going to build out a makerspace in Nairobi, kind of attached to the iHub. It's going to be called Gearbox. And it's really just about really rapid prototyping and this small-scale fabrication that we had such a hard time doing ourselves, right? So we know kind of the pain of this. And we asked this question, though. What happens if we take those Juakali guys, those guys who are used to making and inventing new stuff just by banging stuff with a hammer, and we take them and we mix them with this really active, vibrant, kind of high-tech group that's come through these hubs? What happens when you start melding those two different types of cultures together? We don't know. The answer is we don't know yet, but we think that we're going to see a lot more things like the brick coming from it. And to give you some examples of things that do come out if they're already, we have a robotics group at the iHub. You know, this is just a drone. It's being used for wildlife monitoring, hand-built by this guy. You know, he got part of it's a kit. This is a machine that this guy created to move solar panels so that they stay with the sun. And this is an SMS-based or a text message-based cooking system. So ugali is a normal food in East Africa. It's this kind of porridge. And so with this young man, when he leaves work, he sends a text message to his house. It starts this machine up, so his ugali is waiting for him when he lands. So I want to leave with this quote, that the reason Africa is poor is not that it has too little agriculture. It has too much agriculture and not enough industry. So as technologists, as people who deal with the high-tech world, it's our role as well to think of how we're going to set up the future so that we have more manufacturing and industry that build real businesses as well. In fact, as I look out at Berlin, as I walked around yesterday, I think about the fact that many of the problems that we see in Europe, many of the problems that we see in the US, can be solved by some of the solutions and products and ideas that are going to come from places like Africa and Asia. And I think about it that way because I get to see everything at so much more of a basic level. I see the tech hubs across the continent, and I see the innovations coming from, I see the products coming from Ghana and Liberia and Cameroon. And I say, surely, this is a time where Africa really hits the world stage. And it's not seen anymore as a consumer, as just a consumer of technology, but now as a creator of technology for the rest of the world. Thank you very much.